Hey folks, I know it's been a few days and it is kind of getting late. It's coming up on 10:30 p.m. on my time, and just want to check in with you guys again. I have not relapsed. It's been a few days. I got sick on Tuesday with like a severe cold, and I think it was almost like a psychosomatic um, like illness because the night before, if you saw the video that I uploaded, I mean I made it on day 76, but I uploaded on day 77. I basically kind of dragged myself or crawled to the desk, got on my onto the chair, and just sat down and uploaded that. In a sense, kind of a bit of a dramatic way of saying it, but I had a lot of body aches and like a fever and a bit kind of dizzy and that sort of thing. But uploaded that, and then that day I just I took some Theraflu. Let's see if I still have the thing. I took a bunch of this. Don't worry, I'm dressed. I'm just wrapped in my comfort. I took a bunch of this, and I had some food that I had some hot dogs that I bought and stored in my refrigerator, and the refrigerator, the communal refrigerator we have here, and had some herbal tea and just recovered that day. And then the next day I was so exhausted I pretty much slept most of the day and barely made it to class. And then like I think yesterday I was trying to get my study hours at study hall as much as I could, and um, I had a class later that day, and so now it's late Friday, and it's day 80 Nofap, day it's actually day 21 no porn or P subs. Um, Actually I miscounted it last time, but it was like it was day 20 yesterday. It's day 21, so I've gone through 3 weeks of no porn or substitutes, and that's in addition to making it to day 80 and no faps. So another milestone. If I get through 10 more days, I'll hit that day 90 no fap, and I'll be at that day 31 of no porn or porn subs, which will be great. I've gotten through a month of actual legit hard mode no fap. Um, but other than just giving you guys an update, I wanted to get into this big topic because I saw those comments that off the train left on my last video, I think it was, um, and I finally got around to looking up IFS and reading about it, and I do want to get back and read an article on self-parenting, but I want to talk a bit about IFS, my impressions of it, because it's kind of interesting because I feel like in a lot of ways like I've internalized a lot of those experiences in the past, and you talked about you mentioned the term holding patterns and that sort of thing, and I think in one of his videos where he kind of like he made mention of some stuff I talked about, and I did go look up IFS and um, a bit of reading on Wikipedia and some other areas, but um, three terms that really struck me. He's talking about he was talking about in the article different parts of the internal family system within the person's psyche, managers, exiles, and firefighters, and I really want to focus on that concept, the exile, because um, it's sort of an experience I've had, and I was once I read this and I wanted to try to reinterpret that bad day that I had within that context of IFS, and it's like I've had this sort of it's kind of like an internal conflict every time I wanted to move forward in life and actually mature a bit and do it consciously. It's like that day I got up at 6 a.m. I'd gone to sleep earlier the day, and I made that conscious decision that I want to become a morning person. I want to become disciplined. I want to have a few extra hours in the morning to get stuff done and actually do something with it, not be dragging my feet. I want to be really adult like and all that. And that was kind of like the part of me that I would say is kind of like a managerial part, to use that term from this article. And it's kind of like every time I have that part of me actually enact some sort of plan and try to carry it through, follow through, there's some part of me that would be like, I guess, one of the exile parts that reacts against that. And it's almost like, it's not necessarily that I'm aware that it's acting against it early in the day, let's say, but somewhere along there it'll have to like take over, take over my like, kind of like take over the driver, the driver's seat, or get control over the wheel of the car, so to speak, of my life, of my, mind, and by extension of my body. And that's where I'll end up going from from making mature decisions, effective decisions, and carrying out my plan, implementing it, and actually making progress to making some decision to, I don't know, um, not leave 15 minutes early or half an hour early when I know from the managerial perspective that, hey, you want to get there on time, or you want to get there early so you're not having to face all these negative consequences. You're going to have to do X, Y, and Z. And that part of me that's like rebelling against that will be like, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to leave early. We're going to, screw the consequences. They don't, they can't tell me what to do or whatever. And it feels like on that day, it was like that process. And to specifically focus on that whole concept of the exile, I feel that there's like, at least there's probably multiple ones, like beyond two or three, that are within my quote unquote internal family system. But the two biggest ones that I can see right now are the what I would label the reject, and also the kind of like the problem child, or the problem kid, or the bad kid. And if I were to define them using past experience that I've had, like when I was um, talk about the reject, when I was disenrolled from the Naval RTC program that I was in, and then after this last semester, um, I haven't been officially like kicked out of chemical engineering. It's like as long as I don't get myself put in some sort of permanent hold, which I mean, with the way one of my classes is, it's like the year on probation class, and if I make one too many mistakes, and I go from day to day wondering if I made one too many mistakes. Um, but they could put a permanent hold on me. But assuming that's not the case, I will have quote unquote a second chance to make sure that I don't get kicked out of the major and that I can continue on. Or assuming that there's no problems with like a switch to materials engineering. But regardless, it's like after last semester, it's like I kind of jumped back into that whole reject mode, so to speak, and it's like that exile in a sense kind of came forward and started causing sort of issues in a sense. That's why, like, when you look at some of my earlier videos, I talk about the feelings of loneliness and kind of being cast out, on like it's kind of like being put on a raft and being pushed off from the main ship that everybody else is on. They're partying, they're having a great time, they're moving on to, they're they moved from we've left from port A and they're going to port B, but somewhere along there between port A and port B, I got put on the raft and pushed out, and I'm just floating in the ocean. And that sort of feeling of being the reject and experiencing all of that pain, shame, fear, trauma of that, and it's having this sort of like this analog to the experience I had back in my early 20s when that happened to me, because that was another feeling of being the reject, because I was weeded out of the program. And without getting into the whole responsibility, did I deserve it or did I not? Because I mean, it was kind of a mixed bag of sorts. Um, I see that sort of analogy or that equivalence between those two, and that's why I look at that state of mind, that part of my psyche, as being like what I call the reject with a capital R. It's that's that manifestation of an exile. That's like a part that would fit into that category. Um, and I wrestle with it still. There are moments because anytime like I run into anybody from that group, from that study group, or from that major, they have moved on, and if I run into them, it's kind of like a glimmer of the what could have been, and I just try not to interact with them, which can come off as really rude, but at the same time, it's like me trying to avoid feeling those, having those feelings of pain, shame, fear, trauma, come back to me. But um, other than that manifestation, or that exile part, the other one I wanted to talk about was the problem child. And this one is a bit more complicated. It's hard for me to define because, when you hear the term problem child, it's like, it's kind of like looking at that person, or that, in this case, that part of my psyche from the perspective of the parent who knows right from wrong and wants to look at this, person, or this part of the psyche, and go, what's wrong with you? Why can't you get with the program? And I'm trying to understand it from the perspective of the child, because the reason it's such an issue for me is that I'm in that child seat. I'm put in that feeling, put in that, not that feeling, but in that state where I'm feeling that set of emotions. And it's like I'm 30 years old, but when I go into that problem child or problem kid state of mind, my mother put into that by external circumstances or by my own decisions and their consequences. Excuse me, it's like I have to try and understand what that child, so to speak, that child part of me, that child part of my psyche that has not overcome that sort of challenge, or gotten over that threshold and integrated into sort of adulthood or adult mentality, um, what the feelings are of that aspect of my psyche, and where they come from, and therefore how to resolve them. And I'd have to honestly say that if I were to go past more recent events that have triggered me to go back into that state, I would say that state, in a lot of ways, I would say that it originates from experiences I had as a kid outside of my family, at my school, my elementary school, where because of how should I put this? Outside of anything that I may have said or done as a child, I feel that for the most part, my reacting to certain things that were done onto me because of, I don't know, let's say there was a kid named Tom. His parents didn't like my parents because they didn't like the idea of a guy who, like my dad, was from a foreign country coming over here, getting his degree in an engineering field, making more money than them, being married to um, one of your, basically your, like, not stereotypical, but like the definition of a white woman: blonde hair, green hazel eye, fair complexion, of Northern European descent, American woman. My mother being, excuse me, sorry, drinking a little too much soda, I guess. But anyways, her being married to my father, and them having, the ability to afford a mortgage on a two-story home, and my dad having Mercedes Benz, and them having those prejudices against my family as a result, and then telling, essentially, or instructing their kids that, don't be friends with that kid over there, who's the son of this couple, and not just being Tom or his family, but Tim's family and John's family and Joe's family, and that whole environment being created by that, and then me reacting against it and feeling like not accepted, not wanted, not belonging, and then reacting against that in a sense, like kind of like saying, yeah, well, you guys don't like me, well, I don't like you guys either, you know? Or I never wanted to be your guys' friend anyways, you know? I didn't want to be part of your team anyways, you know? Trying to like pretend like I'm okay with not being part of the group, not being with the program, not being on the same path as everyone because they didn't want me to be part of their group to begin with, but I'm trying to say that or act like that in order to feel okay with not being accepted, you know? And not necessarily for like what I can see as justifiable reasons, i.e., that I was, you know, a dangerous or violent kid or deviant or what have you, but I guess from their perspective in that area, having a multi ethnic or multicultural background, or coming from a family where they had justifiably, you see my dad's background and all the hard work he had to do and what he went through and the trauma that he went through growing up, and not within his family per se, but more like political and like their war revolution in that country and all the death he saw happen, people being massacred and all that kind of stuff. Like yeah, that intense. And then coming here and working his butt off, working his back off, to get ahead in life and really succeeding, and that being seen as deviant, and therefore by extension me being deviant because not only was he more successful than them, but he was also not from here, and therefore not one of them, and by extension me being not one of them, and even more so being quote unquote a half breed in people's minds, and being treated as such. And it's kind of like my attempt on some sort of subconscious level to be okay with being labeled a deviant, even though they're for irrational, prejudiced, one might say even racist reasons for being labeled a deviant and treated as such. Um, I think they kind of gave birth to a sort of problem child, but not just a problem child, but a proud problem child sort of mentality, and that's that sort of exile part right there, where I had to learn to do things my own way, on my own, no support system, um, and having sort of in a sense of painful pride, like coming off as being very proud and like self, like, oh, I'm so great, but behind all that being all this pain of, I wish I didn't have to be like this. I wish I didn't have to be strong. I wish I didn't have, that kind of strong. I wish I didn't have to stand on my own, be on my own, be off there sitting on that table all on my own, reading a book or just looking at the sky or walking around or what have you. I wish I could be over there with everybody else playing, touch football or soccer or climbing on the monkey bars or whatever, But I have to feel like this is okay and this is good and that's all right. And for a time there, it helped me get through some of the tough times in life. But you get to a point where, you know, maybe you've moved out of that geographic locale and you moved to someplace else where people are way more accepting and open-minded and such, and they're not as racist or prejudiced. And it's kind of like you have to make this leap from that mentality to dropping those things and being willing and able to quote unquote get with the program, because getting with the program does not require you to compromise yourself, your morality. It doesn't require you to necessarily pretend to be somebody else, etc., etc., etc. And that is where I feel like that part has contributed to me not being able to fully become an adult. I'm sitting here at 30 years old and I'm still having these issues because I haven't really made that transition. And I think some of it has had to do with the fact that, see, I was born and raised in the Midwest, and Minnesota's not so much. I don't think that there are some pockets that have these kind of issues. Illinois, Same. I ended up in one of those pockets that had this kind of issue, just like there were some areas in Minnesota that are like that. But Minnesota is like no, there's like this Minnesota nice vibe to a lot of those areas where they had that sort of culture of just being more accepting by and large. I think at least it's been my experience. I know my parents have also experienced some of the dark side of it, and maybe I didn't experience as much, or maybe I was too young. But the way I've perceived Minnesota was different than the way I perceived Illinois, which it was far more. I suppose depend upon where you lived in Illinois, especially the Chicago area. Far more monocultural. There's only one way of doing things. Why are you different? If you don't fit into these five categories, something's wrong with you. Whereas Minnesota didn't have that kind of experience. Wisconsin similarly. Um, Especially within my family. I mean, even my grandpa, like, he never really got into things like debating religion or politics with my dad. Most he asked my dad was, "Do you fear God?" He didn't ask, well, what name do you call God by? Or do you believe, in this specific doctrine or that specific doctrine? He never got into that. So, yeah, I lived in the Midwest for several years, came to California. I ended up in Florida for a few years in the Panhandle area, not down in Miami or Daytona Beach or any of those areas, but in the Panhandle area. And that area, both from my personal experience and from talking to other people, is kind of notorious as being more on the reactionary side. That's a stereotype. There are nice people there. It's not all like that, but the stereotype or the perception. Notice I said stereotype perception. I don't mean this is the truth of it. And it's also been a bit, my experience, but I did experience more of that reactionary side where it was like, this is the one way of doing things. This is like, you're either in this category or you're in that category. And if you're anything outside of those two categories or you're anything outside of the one good category, then you're in the bad category. And it was kind of like the whole mentality. I think it kind of, that experience, I think, some ways I chose consciously to react a certain way to it, but then again, I think there's also that part of me, like talking about this whole problem child exile part, that prompted me to not be able to move forward again. It's like either I was stalled or I was pushed back. Excuse me. to to that sort of feeling of being a child again and having to like not be part of the group and rebelling against that and being okay with it through being the problem child, which has its own sort of consequences, negatively speaking, on prominently. So yeah, um, I think that's pretty much what I can think of for now. But yeah, those are the two exile parts I can think of off the top of my head. Did a little bit thinking about this, read about it a bit, but I wanted to really focus on that because at least according to what I've read of IFS, that's where you get like a lot of the pain, shame, fear, and trauma. It's kind of like it's manifested within your consciousness in the form of exiles. And from what I can understand, like you have to resolve those negative feelings that are associated with those parts of your psyche in order to attain a healthy mindedness. Um, yeah, I wanted to focus on the exiles, but now that I think of it, since I'm doing this whole video series on my Nofap journey and no PMO journey, I might as well cover the Firefighters term as well. Because I want to like in these videos I want to relate it back to Nofap, relate it back to no PMO, and from what I've read on that Firefighters term, it appears like that's the part of me that wants me to PMO. Like for instance, today, um, I didn't, like I said, no relapses. Period. I'm still legit hard mode, but I did have about a fantasizing, and I was fantasizing about real girls, like ones that I'd met and interacted with, but I hadn't. Nothing actually happened. It's just like you interact with a girl, I got put in like a it was like an accountability partner thing where it was like for our activity section for this one class, um, where we have meetings we have to go to with advisors, we have projects to work on, we have different assignments we got to complete. So it was like I got paired up with this one girl, and it's like, oh, we had to exchange contact information, and it's like, well, so, you know, I'll text her, she'll text me, hey, did you get this assignment done? Hey, how are you doing on this? Da da da. To basically make sure that keeping tabs on each other so we get our things done. Because other than the fact that this class is supposed to be an easy A, it's full of lots of busy work, and it's a lot of the pass and fail type stuff. And if you get drop kicked out of that class, the guy who teaches it, he's very strict. If you break the rules, so to speak, it's not just a matter of, oh, I got dropped out of class X. It's you got dropped out of class X, and these are the consequences. So I talked to her. We exchanged, like, we had quizzes. We had a quiz. Excuse me. We had a quiz today, and she graded mine, and then I graded hers, and it was kind of like that sort of thing. And I could kind of see her kind of give me, like, like side eye, like, not in a bad way, but it's kind of maybe checking me out. I don't know. That could be me. I don't know. That part of me that's like still feeling like 20-something-year-old guy wanting to feel that, oh, all these girls are checking me out, and I'm the hottest guy in the room or whatever the heck. That younger 20s guy that even if you have a girlfriend and you're loyal to her, you still got that part of you that's wanted to feel like if I wanted to, I got options, so to speak. Like, oh, there's 5 different girls who want me, and oh, I'll stay with my girlfriend and be loyal to her, but if I wanted to leave her, oh, I could, that sort of thing. Like, you want to feel like you got your options, you got your list of 5, 10 girls who you could date if you wanted to, sort of thing. A little bit of an ego trip there, but it seemed like she was, and I mean, I kind of liked her. I mean, I don't know. It's a habit. It's a habit that at 30 years of age, even if I'm not consciously doing it, I do check out girls. It's something that happens. But I came back here, and it's something that I've realized over the course of, like, the most recent phase, and you know I don't mean to be, like, almost like, in a sense, stealing off the train's thunder or anything, because when I say this, I'm saying this as, like, praise and thanking him, because I think it was that there was that one video where he was talking about emotional neglect, and I think I may have mentioned this in previous videos, but that was kind of the thing that it kind of started a sort of process of me looking at PMO and this whole Nofap process, Nofap journey from a completely different angle. It wasn't where, because previously I talked about, oh, I'm stressed, I'm anxious, I'm depressed. Why, that's why I'm PMOing. I gotta find somebody to deal with that other stuff. But then it's like, I started asking myself, like, why am I feeling stressed? Why am I feeling anxious? Why am I feeling depressed? What's really under all of that? Because it's like, you feel the stress, you feel the anxiety, you feel the depression, and it's like, I look at my life, and I've been pretty damn lucky, pardon my language, in terms of material goods. I was born and raised in an upper middle class family. Part of that is due to I would say, with all fairness to my both my parents, and maybe there's things that I haven't seen, but it's kind of behind the scenes. Sort of like, well, my dad was able to do so well in his career because my mom was doing XYZ things behind the scenes, and making sure my dad didn't have to worry about this, and this. But it's, at least in the most apparent sense, it's been because of my dad's hard work. But then again, my mom's also an RN. She contributed, and she also took care of things on the home front. Ultimately, due to my parents' hard work and their intelligence and their maturity and their good habits, and etc., etc., so on and so forth, I was born and raised in an upper middle class family or a well-to-do family, with probably the top, I don't know, 10 to 15% income wise, in the United States. And as a result, I've never really known what true hunger feels like in terms of the physical hunger. I've never known what it's like to, have to like sleep in a truly cold house during the winter. Never known what it's like to live on the street. I've never known any of those kinds of forms of suffering or fear or you know I've had those needs met and even exceeded, like in terms of quality of food, quality of clothing, quality of housing, quality of education. The fact that my dad would sit down with me and help me with my math and my science homework and really like push me like and try to inspire me. And my mom helping me with literature and English and language and that aspect, and encouraging me to read and you know all that sort of stuff. So those aspects I got my needs met, but there was emotional neglect. There was even some emotional abuse at times, and I say at times because it's like I remember those memories so strongly. They weren't necessarily every single day or every single week or every single month, but in a lot of ways they stuck with me. They have made me feel at times like my life really did suck, and in some ways it did. But getting back to it, it's like feeling all this stress and this anxiety and this depression and whatnot, or this sadness. I really don't like that word depression, in part because it's so not traumatized, but it's so stigmatized. If you admit to having depression, well, you can say goodbye to so many things. So many career opportunities and career paths in life and whatnot. And you're treated like this diseased creature that's broken. But to get back on topic, it's like I'll be sitting here in this room, or I'll be sitting at the library, or I'll be wherever I am, and it's not like there are, bombs being dropped from the sky, fighter bombers going overhead, or soldiers running around shooting at me, or anything like what my dad went through, being lined up against the wall. I mean, I've had, I've had the experience of having, for all intents and purposes, a gun placed against my forehead, a loaded gun, in the middle of the night, and essentially being robbed of my wallet and being threatened with death if I didn't give my wallet over fast enough. So I had that experience, but it wasn't on the level of a war, and it wasn't like I was on my fifth deployment in some military unit or living the life that my dad lived, where he saw dead bodies here, there, and everywhere. Nothing like that. And I haven't lived on the street. I haven't been in the, pardon the use of the term, but the quote unquote the ghetto in terms of like growing up in there. So I haven't had that experience, and it's like sitting there feeling the stress, feeling the anxiety, feeling the depression. If I'm sitting in the library, I'm sitting in my house, my room, like I have that big question of why am I feeling like this? There's no, there are the deadlines, there's the exams, there's the papers that are due, there are the grades, there's all those consequences that you're aware of, but it's not like there's anything really pressing like around me, like I'm not having to hide somewhere from some, I don't know, from some death squad coming to kill me or whatever. It's like, so why am I feeling like this? Well, there are all these traumatic experiences I've had as a child or as an adolescent or even as a young adult that they stuck with me, and it's kind of they manifested as part of my psyche, and then there's this part of me that wants to try to cope with that, and that's where the PMO comes into play. Um, and then the managers, it's kind of like almost like the manager part of me is at war with the firefighters and trying to resolve the exiles suffering and such, but it's this whole muddled up mess, and I'm finally trying to make sense of it. Um, so, I feel like I almost lost my train of thought, but so talked about the exiles, two biggest ones that I could think of. I have brought in the concept of firefighters because that's where I think the PMO comes into play. It's like the fire's raging and I gotta put the fire out, because the fire is, basically a manifestation of the pain or the trauma felt by those exile parts of my psyche, and the firefighter jumps in and goes, pours like basically PMO overall to try to put out the fire. But as those of us who are on the Nofap journey know, that doesn't really put us like pouring gasoline on the fire in a sense. So yeah, it's helped me make a lot more sense of things. And even as I had that sort of bout of fantasizing when I know I got off way off topic with that, but to try to get back to that, I know I'm kind of jumping around here, there, and everywhere, but to get back to that and try to resolve that topic I was talking about, even though I had that bout of fantasizing today, I've had this sort of shift in my understanding of why this is all happening, why I want to fantasize, why I want to PMO, why am I doing this? Well, because it's all about the stress, the anxiety, the depression. But why are those feelings of stress, anxiety, depression? Why are those, the sadness? Why does that touch you so much, or touch you so much? Why does it hurt you so much? Touch kind of sounds awkward and weird when you say that. It's like, ugh. Anyways, why does that hurt me so much? Because it's like associated with these parts of my psyche that are manifestations of, in a sense, of traumatic experiences I've had, these exiles, and it's kind of like those exile parts latch on to the feelings of stress, anxiety, depression, sadness, pain, trauma that I'm feeling right now because of current experiences. And the firefighters or the firefighter aspect wants to jump in there and go, here's a solution, here's a quick fix, PMO, fantasizing, uh, candy bar, whatever it may be. And just the fact that I'm aware of that now, and aware of, the fact that, like, all the trainers talk about these different layers. Now, I don't know if I've really, like, per se, talked in a sense about the layers. I mean, I've kind of, I do vaguely remember watching one of his videos where he talked about that, but um, I'm probably approaching like a similar topic or the same topic, but from the perspective of what I've read in this article. Um, but because I'm aware that it's like I have, how should I put it? I have this underlying negative experiences or traumatic experiences, and then those have essentially kind of morphed into parts of my psyche, the exiles, firefighters, managers, um, and then those separate parts latch onto the feelings that are induced by current experiences, the stress, anxiety, depression, and they kind of each go into their sort of mode of contending with those, and they're kind of at war with each other, to a certain extent. Sometimes, like, I think this article, it talks about some like alliances between the different parts and that sort of thing. So maybe at times, like, the managers and the firefighters try to ally with each other so they can contend with the exiles, or exiles and managers, exiles and firefighters, whatever the case may be. But then you get to that level of stress, anxiety, depression, which is like the one closer to the surface. But then beyond that, that's when you see the manifestation of the actual actions, like what you're trying to do, which is rooted in this sort of internal struggle, this internal system. And perhaps that's the closest thing that I can put into my own words, um, relating to my experiences that what Off the Train was talking about. Correct me if I'm wrong. but it seems like it's kind of working like that, and the fact that I'm even aware of it now is probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest thing that's prevented a relapse from me, because I've been able to look at that and go, these feelings are not a good enough reason. This is not the reason why you're feeling this. This is not the reason why you want to do this. And this is not the thing to do, because the big problem underlying all this stuff, the stuff that's making you feel like this, the stuff that's making you, not even making you, but um, triggering you or pushing you towards making X, Y, or Z bad decision, that which will then continue this whole negative spiraling out of control, or this downward, snowballing of your life in the direction you don't want to go, in the direction you've been going. It's not going to be resolved, stopped, changed by, for instance, PMO or binging on chocolate, or what have you. You might get that short little dopamine burst and it might feel good in the moment, but you're not really resolving the thing. You're not really doing what you need to do in order to have the results you want to have, because you don't want to just feel good for now. You want to feel accomplished and fulfilled, and a lot of that's going to have to do with me facing adversity and learning from it and overcoming it. And it doesn't mean me just putting myself in those situations, but allowing the adversity to just continue, um, without me ever reaching that light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. So, and I think that's probably where I should stop, because my next video, um, I want to talk about the concept of the self in IFS, because I think that's going to be the next big leap for me personally, because that's kind of like where you move from, just from what I've read, from what I read and understood, it's where you move from just kind of like becoming aware of how you're constructed in here, to actually being able to kind of like almost like hack the code of your mind and make alterations, and resolve those disparate entities, so to speak, into one whole self, one whole being, one whole, new individual, such that you can become that person you want to be, and so these problems get resolved. And for instance, for myself, that PMO and things of that nature are no longer truly an issue, and that I don't have this sort of desire to look for an outlet, because I've resolved the big problem that was causing me to want to look for an outlet. So, yeah. I know this has been a really long, rambling video, and I've jumped around here, there, and everywhere, but it's one of those things where, like, I had this habit I established of making videos, like, either every day or every other day, and with this sickness I had, I got off track, and it was this kind of big, like, struggle of just making a video, getting something out there. No, it's not perfect. I know it's not necessarily the best, but I'm at least gonna have a day 80 video, for Nofap, day 21 video for no porn or P-subs, and hopefully someone out there will find this helpful, and enlightening, and inevitably there are people who know more about IFS than I do. Like, for instance, Off the Train, I do want to try and get perhaps a PDF of I think it was R.C. Schwartz. It looks like R.C. Schwartz, his book on the subject, and I can read that and perhaps gain a better understanding even further than what I have right now. So, yeah. It's 11:06 p.m. 24th of February 2017. Day 80 Nofap. Have not relapsed in that. It's day 21 no porn or P-subs. Have not relapsed in that either. Continuing on. Gonna get to that day 90 Nofap Hopefully that's the plan, and then that'll be day 31, no porn or P subs, one day at a time. Um, if you found this video helpful at all, a lot of it's been me relating IFS to my own self, but if you can see that kind of connection, perhaps you can find IFS, internal family systems, that model useful, and perhaps be able to relate it to your own selves and, gain something from that. So if you have found this video helpful at all, if you wouldn't mind liking, commenting, subscribing. I'm going to do a video tomorrow on the concept of the self in this, and then moving on to, further concepts. Like I said, it's been a bit of a rambling video, but just trying to get something out there right now so that I have, kind of the next episode of the series of this journey. So, thanks for watching, folks, and see you around next time. Bye.